So I think just to quickly start, we actually, when we initiated this credit platform discussion, I remember Kunal from PwC and us discussing, and we said it's a very interesting topic which is coming up. And we thought that, we'll have about 60, 70 people. But just when we started, the numbers started shooting up. And even after we stopped registrations, there was a lot of stuff. So we have tried our best to manage the crowd. All of you are most welcome. I'm sorry for the mix-up a bit, but I hope you'll adjust and manage. I think just to start, I think Nishith bhai, we'd like to start up with your opening remark, but just so that I can set out the agenda for the day, we have divided this day into 5 sessions. The first is the inaugural session, which is this session, largely on the macroeconomic framework for the credit platforms and the offshore investors, particularly looking at the credit segment. After that, we are having a marathon session between PwC and us. I think it's a historic partnership that PwC and NDA is having, thanks to Gautam, Kunal, and a lot of PwC partners to come together. It's a 2-hour elaborate session on structures ranging right from offshore to domestic structures, ARCs and everything. Third session is on enforcement. Fourth session is on real estate and infrastructure sector impact, and the last session is on Fintech. Between that, we have breaks and all, but just so that you are fully aware of how this is going to be organized. Maybe Nishith bhai, I can just call you for giving opening remark, introducing, and then, yeah.
Thank you so much. You can sit wherever you want. First of all, good morning. And everyone can sit down and relax. I think some people are standing behind, you want to come in front. Some seats are there, but maybe you can do that. Fortunately, and to some extent unfortunately, we thought we'll have about 100 odd people to come to attend this conference. And when we opened up registration, we didn't put any limit. We had about 450 registrations. And it was most embarrassing for us to say no to half the people because we just didn't have capacity. We are a small law firm, and we do not have big facility, So at least, and in the process, what we have tried to do is we have to open up this conference room so that more people can be accommodated. Also, we opened up auditorium, which is separate place, fully connected, live kind of a situation, all of the facility. And entire sound system is connected here, including in the garden. It's IoT-driven facility, by the way. So I think we have tried to see as many people can be comforted here. But my first request would be that everyone who is standing behind, please take your seat, sit down, so there is no, hustle bustle, and you will feel more comfortable. So can I request each one to sit down? If you don't have a seat, you then come in front, or there is other boardroom, or wherever you want to sit, you'll be live. So once again, welcome everybody. Thank you so much. It's really my pleasure to have you all. My name is Nishith Desai. I am the founder of this firm. We are more into what we call advanced predictive legal practice. And what it means is that we try to look to the future. Our philosophy is that every new technology, every new social, political, economic development like this, credit issues coming up, whole country is looking like becoming NPA and stuff like that. How can we change the world together? So our purpose of the firm with which I started 30 years ago was to change the world for the better. Even 1 cent we can change, it is good. That is the fundamental thing, and together, it's not, we cannot do everything alone. And so we are now an India-centric global law firm. We have offices worldwide, and but it's a real pleasure to have you all. What I would like to tell you, this facility we have set up, it is Imaginarium, just as you've been to planetarium, aquarium, museum, possibly this is the place for imagining, because to change the world for the better, you need to dream something. You need to think something. You need to imagine something. And in the process, what we found was that how do you imagine, how do you think, and how ideation happens? It happens in different settings. You have some idea, so there is a place, library, solo thinking. Then you take idea to 2 or 3 people, so there is facility for 2 or 3 people to discuss. Then there is facility for 5 people, 10 people. So ideation flowers from individual to collective. So that's how this has been set up. And it's one of the most, I would say, high-tech facility, not only in India, but in the world. And this is the first initiative on setting up an Imaginarium. Just to think, ideate, and dream to change the world, not only in the field of law or tax, but also it could be technology, philosophy, economics, whatever. It's blue sky thinking and research campus. We are a research-based law firm. Spend about 35% of our time on research, sometimes 40, and try to see whatever little we can do. But at the same time, this facility is what we call a model is private property for public good. So this is a platform for thinkers, ideators, think tanks, other people. Once again, come together, do something. And we don't rent out to anybody. It's our own property. We put in about $20 million, 90% of our own funding. So we have not gone to banks, unfortunately. But idea is that if there is any high-level cause or something that you think, be our guest. So we don't charge rental, there is no rental model. It's a purpose-driven facility, but it's private by invitation. So we want to see what is the purpose, what is the intent, and are we going to create some impact on a slightly larger scale. There are hundreds of incubators and accelerators, so this is not incubator. It's pre-incubation, just for thinking and stuff like that. So this was just a little perspective. This is also called Aligunjan because this is broadly in the Alibag area. Ali is also a neutral name, Hindu, Muslim, everywhere. Hindus, in Sanskrit, it means Bhaura, the bee. And the musing of a bee is Gunjan. So we say this is humming sound and stuff like that. So this little background on the whole thing. I do not again want to take too much time. We'll continue to discuss, but just relax. As I mentioned, I like to slow you down a little bit, Just don't be in a hurry, rush. You're going to be having a whole life for that, and bankers in particular. So, don't worry, just relax, and whatever you want, just go around, enjoy your time. I just want to welcome Rajiv and Gunit, Manisha, and of course, Gaurav. He has been a great partner for us in this particular event, and I've known him for a long time, and I'm so delighted that you have come, So maybe we can start with Rajiv. We are slightly late, but I think to be late in this place is something not so bad.
It's a panel, so I'll ask questions.
Beg your pardon. So maybe we'll start with Rajiv. If you'd like to open, or
no, I think we're making it like
he is my
panel
boss, by the
discussion.
way. I'm the head count in the organization. He is my brain count. So
You have about half an hour
please.
or so, no? So I think I'll probably start with you only, Rajiv. You've been pretty much, a father figure, I can say, for financial services, credit market, and also with low capital.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I say people have started calling me uncle on the street, which is already disturbing. Now you're making me a father figure. It's okay.
No, I think, Rajiv, my first question to you is that, island affairs crisis has probably been at the forefront for a while. Some people say we are overreacting to it. Some people say that, it happens. But I think somewhere it presents a very disturbing picture. AAA rated one day. In 2 months' time, you're downgraded to D grade. Is it that the whole system collapsed, including the rating agencies? Rating agencies are also being probed. How do you look into the whole issue? Do you think everyone is overreacting, or do you think the situation is actually so bad?
So I wanted to, since taking, first of all, Nishith Bhai, thank you for having us here. I'm blown away by this facility. It really is incredible, the contribution that you're making. And I hope that this will be the first of many future platforms that will get an opportunity to discuss issues like this. But taking a cue from Nishith Bhai, this is actually, ILFS is just a symptom. And for this kind of occasion, it's probably more appropriate to spend a few minutes on speculating or discussing root causes. And I've obviously been reflecting a lot on this because of my own engagement and the nature of my engagement in Indian financial services. And there are 2 or 3 thoughts that I wanted to share. And then you can decide how deep the problem is, okay? You know, I've been now associated, I mean, I was in an executive position at IDFC for 15 years. And I've seen the highs and I've seen the lows. I've been engaged in a sector that is at the heart of a tension in Indian economy in general, which is the interface between the public and the private. All right? You know, after 1991, after however many years of independence, it is only in 1991 that we started allowing private activity to really flourish. So my first observation is that much as the flourishing of private activity has contributed to wealth creation and growth and such like, the biggest untouched area of reform is to develop the capacity of the state administrative machinery to deal with private activity. Now, I think the old debate of, oh, we must privatize everything, government doesn't work, so let's do it private. Infrastructure, this is how we came to private infrastructure. We came to private infrastructure in this country for all the wrong reasons. We came to private infrastructure in this country because government did not have money to invest in public infrastructure. Public infrastructure is a public good. It is not meant for profit, water supply, etc., right? I know, I mean, I've spent half my life talking about public-private partnerships, but the point is that it's a public good. Harnessing private entrepreneurial energy and animal spirits to deliver a public good in the most sophisticated economy in the world is very hard to do. And we tried to do it in India, starting, you know, in the late 1990s. It's not been an abject failure. There have been some very notable successes. Our telecom story is very, very, I mean, it's an amazing, amazing story. But there have also been very notable failures. And those failures have happened because of this tension between public and private and the inability, in my view, and this has not really been discussed, of our state administrative machinery and our judicial machinery to actually deal with the growing sophistication of private activity. So the first comment on this is it's ironic, but to have a vibrant private sector, a vibrant financial system, you must have a very strong and sophisticated state administrative and adjudicating machinery. If that is dysfunctional, you cannot build a properly functioning private. Then you get allegations of soot boot ki sarkar, corruption. You know, it's very easy to say you are corrupt, everybody is corrupt, right? But the mahal, the environment in which this has happened, has to do with the decline and the falling behind of state capacity relative to the entrepreneurial class. Now coming to you know, ILFS in this context. and I mean, I can share with you IDFC's experience, and then you can make what you will of ILFS. And I can talk about it freely now. I have no, even if there are no Chatham House rules, I really don't care, right? I can tell you that we petitioned for a bank license whenever it is that we did, because we saw the writing on the wall. It was an existential threat for IDFC. If we had not converted into a bank or found a way of diversifying beyond infrastructure, IDFC today would have been dead. Right?
Yeah.
Okay, so I couldn't say that when we were petitioning for a bank license. So we made a case, which is a credible case. We talked about the future, right? And we tried to persuade the Reserve Bank of India at that time that, look, if you have now given us a banking license, can you please allow us to run off the bad assets and leave them behind in the old company? No. There was no such thing as principle-based regulation. You have been given a particular licensing, whatever it is, which is written, which is in any case not very well drafted. So there are all kinds of interpretation issues, et cetera, which some people now are litigating, as you know. This is how regulatory edicts are drawn up. But we were then given the opportunity to build a bank. Marta kya nahi karta, right? So we took the bank license. When we started, we had 150 people, 3 branches, a 75,000 crore balance sheet, and we knew at that time that 25% of that balance sheet was short. And we were forced not only to migrate all our bad assets from the parent to the new bank, we were on those bad assets paying regulatory penalties. उसपे PSL भी डालो, उसपे CRR भी डालो, उसपे SLR भी डालो. 30% of my balance sheet is earning 0. Right? Then you force me to list day one. Why? Because my original shareholders were listed. They started saying, "Arey Baba, I must own the bank ab initio. I cannot be treated as a second-class citizen." That when you list the bank 5 years later, as an original founding shareholder of IDFC, why should I then be forced to acquire the shares of the bank when it is listed? I must be given shares of that entity today. So you had to, because they were public shareholders, you had to list the bank day one. Now, October 2015, as a listed bank, we started with these initial conditions. Right? So it's like saying, sir, आपको हाथ पैर सब बांध दिए, अब आप बैंक बन जाइए. Right? So, point I'm making is, it was plainly obvious for people who knew anything about infrastructure, for the more fundamental reason that I'm talking about. We can have a more colorful discussion about that conflict between public and private meant. And I'll give you just one anecdotal example, right? Coal India, providing coal for power plants through long-term fuel supply agreements. Now, if they default on this, who's going to take them on? Right? Now then the power plant says, okay, can I substitute Coal India's coal with imported coal? But imported coal is more expensive, so it screws up my economics. So then the question is, can I have a pass-through for imported coal? नहीं, आपके PPA में लिखा था कि ये नहीं possible. So then you stick to the law. The joke in this country is that China has order, we have law.
Correct.
So it becomes spurious legal, we talk about the rule of law, we stick to contractual obligations when everybody knows that the national interest lies elsewhere. It requires some pragmatic decision making, but everybody coming together and saying, look, now this is a bad situation. How are we going to distribute the pain and the losses? Instead, all we ended up doing in a very conflictual situation is pointing fingers at each other, right? Uh, that's the conflict between public and private that led very clearly to the writing on the wall. Infrastructure was going to be in for a big, big problem. Now, if this is what IDFC was going through,
Yeah.
right, I can't understand how it was not plainly obvious to sophisticated people, financiers across the system, that this is a big fundamental looming problem in Indian infrastructure, right? But it's human psychology. And I can tell you about the debates we were having internally within IDFC at the time. You know, mere baal pak gaye hain, not trying to persuade people outside the organization, but trying to get people inside the organization to accept that given the institutional framework or lack thereof, ecosystem for resolving assets in this country, loss given default in project finance is going to be 80 to 90 cents on the dollar. People were unwilling to accept that. So my own ability to write off, I had to fight my own board, I had to fight my own colleagues for people to understand that this is the looming loss, right? But, I mean, now people should reflect in retrospect. Wasn't this obvious? That if this is the fundamental problem in infrastructure, and we are headed for a massive, compromise in the quality of assets, and if you know anything about the quality of our judiciary, its ability, its capacity, not its ability, its capacity, physical capacity, to absorb the amount of litigation that was forthcoming, it was plainly obvious to, at least to me, that the losses on this would be extremely high. But human psychology is such that it took forever for people to admit that this would happen. Even today, people haven't fully admitted it. Right? So I can only say that I am shocked. I am really surprised that people did not have knowledge that this problem was in the making in infrastructure. Second comment, and then I'll stop because I can go on this. The second comment, so the first conclusion, as I said, first observation I made is that state capacity to adjudicate the conflict between public and private is a big problem. Second conclusion I've come to after 15 years in the system, and very reluctantly to this conclusion, right? For the same reason that the institutional infrastructure remains weak, it remains a long time, it will still require more time to build, right? The ability and the functioning of completely professional organizations is seriously wanting. And it is ironic that under these institutional circumstances and context, I'm coming to the conclusion that for accountability and effectiveness of decision making in times of trouble, family-owned businesses are better. Why? Because at least in those companies, somebody has skin in the game. They will make quick decision making. In a completely professional organization, right, where there is no clear ownership is completely diffuse. There is nobody to stand up and take responsibility. Independent directors are missing in action. Credit committees, who's responsible for making a decision? Who's going to be accountable? Nobody wants to accept any wrongdoing. Forget about wrongdoing when I say wrongdoing, error in judgment. And you can't blame them either. You can't blame them because the system cannot make a distinction between errors in judgment and wrongdoing. So if an error in judgment is going to be painted or tainted as wrongdoing, who wants to acknowledge making any errors in judgment? My judgment could never be wrong. So actually we are not ready institutionally for professionally run organizations at a large scale, is my reluctant conclusion. So I'm exaggerating my point a bit only to be provocative.
Come back. I think very, very interesting points. And I'll come back to you on whether it's systemic or because decision making is one part of it. But other than ILFS, I think the whole NBFC, the whole of the NBFCs felt like a pack of cards, one by one and one by one, Guneet. And that's where I'm coming to you, that a lot of our clients come to us and said that, we want to buy, set up NBFCs and this is the right time to enter. A lot of acquisitions were happening, but then I think everyone's now waiting that is it the right time to get in, or should you just wait and see where does this finally end up, this crisis. Now, you have set up this NBFC and naturally with your stellar background and all, it was not that difficult for you as it may be for some other people. But I think my question to you is, with bank funding drying up, mutual funds kind of taking a little bit resistant approach to CPs and all, with this kind of funding drying up, do you think this was the appropriate time for you to get into the market? Did this even matter to you at all? Or do you think this is the best time, or you could have waited some time? What were the business models? What were you thinking when you set this up? How do you look at it, the timing of your setting up?
See, if the question is, was this the best time in terms of, is this a good decade to set up NBFC? The short answer is yes, right? Who cares whether, we were 3 months behind or 3 months ahead? That's irrelevant, actually. Actually, it's not even about an NBFC. It's about the opportunity which is available both to banks, which is available to funds, which is available to NBFCs, and any other legal vehicle form which you want. I think the opportunity ahead is truly significant. And without getting into the usual demographics and macro and everything else, I just think that there's so much of unmet demand for credit, which is coming from every single constituency in the country, right? Whether it's the underbanked consumers, the non-salaried, the new-to-credit consumers, whether it's the SMEs and the micro, small, medium enterprises, or whether it's even some of the wholesale borrowers. I just think the opportunity is staring at us in the face, and it's not going to get addressed with the existing suppliers of capital over the next decade. Simple as that. So whether it was a bank format, small bank format, universal bank format, it didn't really matter. The question is, there's a real opportunity. Now, against that opportunity, I'm afraid, but my view is that the PSU banks are playing an unlevel playing field with the private sector banks. The most difficult job to do in this country is probably the SBI chairmans or the Bank of Baroda chairmans or the PNB chairmans. And I think it's an unequal playing field out there relative to the private banks. And we're not here to discuss what the issues are. I think the many committees which have been formed and all the remedies are right in front, right? Including in the infrastructure world, what needs to get done. But it needs to get done, and it's not getting done. The problem is not of ownership of public sector banks. The problem is of consequences of that ownership, right? The government of Singapore owns, through Temasek, DBS Bank, right? And they are probably a 40% shareholder. But yet the state-owned enterprises are the best performing enterprises across Singapore and in many other parts of the region, Malaysia, et cetera, et cetera. So the question is, if the PSU banks are going to face the same headwinds, not just for capital, not just for the corner office, those are not the issues. The issue is, how are you going to compete when you have an unfair opportunity to attract capital from the bottom of the pyramid, capital as in human capital. If you can't get resources which are the best in the industry, how are you going to compete? for that opportunity which is significant. So, given that there is a real constraint in the PSU world, the opportunity then has to get served by the private sector banks, and some of them are clearly seizing that opportunity and will continue to over the next 5 to 10 years, and NBFCs. Okay? So, and then it doesn't matter whether your NBFC was set up in 2015, 16, or whether it's going to set up in 2020, and there are going to be many others who are going to come ahead. And so if I then think as to why did one choose the NBFC format rather than the bank format? It's very difficult to set up a greenfield bank. I thought about it a lot. I spent a lot of time with Raghu as well on the policy which was written out. But just the difficulty factor of putting up a greenfield bank and the regulatory and compliance overload and some of the points which Rajiv made were way too expensive for a startup company. And so an NBFC allows you to take the same opportunity and more, probably with some risk of institutional financing. But the opportunity doesn't go away. The opportunity is for real. I think what has happened since September 21st, which was when the whole ILFS issue broke out, I think, is that people have finally realized that there is a premium to governance. When I stepped in, and I made quite a few mistakes in moving from a professional to trying to becoming an Indian entrepreneur over the last 12 months, but I have to say, the overwhelming opinion which came to me was, governance is a hygiene factor. Who cares? Investors don't care. Really, no one cares. And I was shocked with the response which kept coming back to me of governance being a hygiene factor. And to me, it's a condition precedent, it's a condition subsequent. It's the only way to build a business is if you have very strong values, culture, governance. The test of governance comes when you have to make a trade-off between P&L and culture. It's very easy to have good governance when you have P&L as well. Now make the trade-off. Do you really want to go after the P&L, or do you want to keep your culture intact, your values intact, your governance intact? So for us at APAC Financial Services, we are very clear that, I'll even tell you, the first two banks we'd love to raise leverage from are the two banks who I think sit on very, very high governance, which is Kotak Bank and HDFC Bank. So the whole thinking is that your partners have to be where you think governance standards are so high that as you grow with these partners, you will actually take that away as an issue which has faced many of the other NBFCs. The second fallacy on NBFCs which came to the fore was that big is good. I've been in a bank where the balance sheet size was $2.6 trillion, euros, sorry, right? Big is not necessarily good. Big could be very bad. So this whole myth of adding AUM, because that's the metrics of valuation, I don't understand at least. And I think good big is good, but bad big is very, very bad, right? And it doesn't surprise me that in the recent times, some of the bigs are where the problems have all occurred. The other thing when you set up your NBFC is to be very clear, what are you focused on? I tell you, at APAC, we are focused on businesses which have a higher difficulty factor, businesses which have some white space, businesses which have probably government tailwind or regulatory tailwind, businesses which can build sustainable P&L with fair practice. And yet I see many NBFCs going and doing 10 and 10.5 and 11% laps around their balance sheet. How are you going to make money? And I think not just shareholders, but rating agencies should be very concerned when any entity starts building business models where P&L is not visible. So I think it's the same old GMV story of the e-commerce companies. Some of the NBFCs have to ask the question, right? Besides governance, besides size, is What are you building out here? What are you building? How are you going to be able to return a cost on your equity which should be in the mid-teens, right? And yet some have shown a spectacular path, right? So like private banks, some of them have shown a spectacular path. Some NBFCs have shown a spectacular path. But the only thing which I would say is build businesses not for time, being today, tomorrow, or a year from now. Build businesses which you think have a forward for 5 to 10 years. And as a result, and I'll stop there, and as a result, the way we worked with the capital structure of APAC Financial is we have the NBFC, all other businesses are going to be 100% subsidiaries of the company. So the NBFC is the operating company, the holding company. Everyone is an equity investor in that company, including the entire leadership team. Our ESOPs are 5-year cliff vest. So if you don't think you want to be in the company for 5 years, then it's better you don't come into the company. And I, as one of the founders and the promoter of the company, frankly have no rights in terms of economics which are superior to any of the other shareholders or investors. So it's very clean. If the company does well, everyone does well. If the company doesn't do well, the promoter is not going to walk away with a smile on his face, right? So the opportunity is real. Run it with good governance. Don't chase shadows and don't chase AUMs, and build profitable, sustainable businesses where you're solving a real consumer problem, right? Don't build businesses which the street necessarily wants to value at this point of time, even without any visibility of P&L, leave alone multi-digit ROEs. So I'll stop there.
Thank you. Very well. I think that reminds me, when you talk about governance, then there'll be no liquidity issues, and then don't be the rush for AUM. And that reminds me something, Nishith bhai, which you always say, is that more and more corporates in recent times have died of ethical bankruptcy than financial bankruptcy. So I think if you really have governance right in place, I don't think that's a challenge. In fact, on that point, just one note I had in mind was that when you said that banks versus NBFCs, it's always been a very unlevel playing field. I remember being in the USIBC Financial Services Committee, and then Governor Subba Rao had come, and we asked them that you regulate NBFCs, that time systemically important was 100 crore plus. He said, you regulate NBFCs just as much, but when it comes to giving benefits like SARFAESI and all, why are we not given those benefits? And then he said that, that's a mindset issue. Banks will try to reconstruct banks and ARCs, and NBFCs will just try to salvage and get the money out. So I think they have come a long way since then to allow this now.
But on that SARFAESI,
yes.
Since Nishith, you spent quite some time with the government, talk about Startup India. Why have startup NBFCs, startup housing finance companies not got SARFAESI protection? Why do we have to apply? If I have the license, if we are good enough to get a license, and at least we got a license, not on the secondary markets, we got a license because we applied to the regulator without sort of any intermediaries and got both the licenses. But now we have to apply for a SARFAESI after 3 years, right? And then wait for some government committee to approve it. Where's the Startup India, right?
But I guess now, Guneet, with the IBC and all coming in, I mean, Nishith, you welcome to give your comment, but I think now with the IBC and all coming up, and we'll discuss that, I think we are seeing the scope of SARFAESI increasingly reducing. People more and more going towards fast-track arbitrations and insolvency. So I think, yes, it's a disadvantage. It should be a level playing field, but it is where it is. But somewhere they recognize in the Thorat Committee report and all that. Manisha, I'll just come to you quickly now. We've been a high-yield economy, There was a time in real estate, people used to borrow at 22%, and I used to wonder where the margins and how will they make the money. When you borrow 22% IRR, how does this work? Now, these kind of numbers, when you go to Western countries, are unheard of. So obviously, India is a high-yield economy. Credit makes sense. People have made a lot of money, whether in whichever segment, including microfinance also, people have done pretty well financially. I think my question to you is, credit is the way to go. A lot of people are coming. How do you see your particularly offshore clients looking at India, the financial service sector? Do you think the IL&FS crisis has presented a very bad picture of India, like something like which is lacking the fundamentals of governance and all of it, or is it not seen in that light? Question number one, the overall outlook for India. Question number two is, are they looking for acquisitions immediately, or are they waiting? Because book value to multiple, this was a great model, but somewhere a lot of the deals that we were seeing, Reliance HFC, etc., some of them just went quiet for a while. Is it a wait and watch approach, or or what's the outlook you're seeing?
Sure. So, look, in my 25-year career, whenever any sector, let's start with telecom, which Rajiv mentioned, when a sector starts initially, we really, all of us as bankers and all other intermediaries position it as we're a 1.3 billion people country, 400 million middle class, highest number of smartphone users. The statistics, all of you know, highest rate of financialization of savings, $250 billion. So all the macros which Gunit mentioned, very, very positive. What happens as a result of it, that there's a fear of missing out amongst investors. So they're not able to discern between the good and the bad. The number of companies I've gone in to meet NBFCs who've said, look, we're only going to raise money and we're only going to give you the mandate if you get us the Bajaj multiple. Bajaj is a 12-year-old story, right? Quarter after quarter, he has demonstrated high earnings, high quality, high corporate governance. But who are we as intermediaries to say, look, we're not going to try. So we try, and as a result, you've seen in the last companies with 12 to 15 months of existence raising capital at 5 times book value, 4 times book value. So I think a lot of that frenzy happened because there was a lot of fear of missing out amongst investors. The rest of the world was slowing down. All of the statistics you're all familiar with. India looked really positive, stable government, all of the good statistics. And a lot of these NBFCs came up just playing the regulatory arbitrage, to Rajiv's point, the asset liability mismatch arbitrage, the developer loans which came at 22%, and you funded that through CPs. A lot of it basically setting yourselves up for disaster. What ILFS has done, and it's very unfortunate that it's happened, is that there is now going to be a huge discernment for quality. So basically, I think all the companies which in the last 2-3 years, 12-month-old companies, 6-month-old companies, very little business rationale. Actually, the promoter group has a steel company as the main business, and this is just a side business. I think that game is over, and which is very good. This is what happened in banks. Kotak, HDFC, the multiples they trade at, the other banks don't trade at. So I think you'll see the same happening in the NBFC sector. The big, high-quality, well-capitalized companies will gain, and the smaller ones who were just and also ran playing the arbitrage opportunity will fall off. To your point about, are investors waiting and watching? No, a lot of the good quality investors are saying this is the moment we were waiting for. You saw how Aadhaar housing was fought for. We were representing one of the bidders. We lost out to Blackstone. And I can't tell you how hard this was fought. And this is in the peak of the crisis, right? Every day bad news is coming out, Cobra Post or DHFL, etc. And the deal got closed in the middle of that. So I think you'll see the big boys come in. You'll see high quality capital come in, you'll see the winners come in, and I'm actually really positive on what's happening in this sector, because this is exactly what's happened in sector after sector, telecom, steel, that the well-capitalized companies and the high quality and high corporate governance companies will win.
Great. So just on that, a follow-up question. So when all of these consolidations are happening, one is from an acquisition perspective. A lot of this consolidation opportunities, right, would also require a lot of, let's say, NBFCs gearing up to private equity investors, to come and support them. How are you seeing the private equity angle in this? Are you seeing PE investors come in to give strategic support or financial support?
Yeah, so you'll see a consolidation across the sector. You'll see banks to NBFCs. You'll see NBFCs to NBFCs. A lot of companies actually just buying out assets from some of these companies, right? That's a clever way of doing it rather than just pay a multiple on the book. A lot of the assets are trading hand and exchanging hands. So a lot of that happening, and private equity is seeing itself as a strong supporter of the high quality companies. They're positive. They want to come in. Some of the strategics, you'll see the banks plus microfinance. You saw IndusInd and Bharat Financial. A lot of the fintech companies, Access, Freecharge. A lot of that consolidation will happen across the sector. The last mile connectivity will be very important, and private equity remains extremely positive. You'll continue to see them coming. But as I said before, there'll be a premium for high quality companies, and that's exactly how it should be. Some of them will fall off. Some of them may not just consolidate. They may just die. I see 20 to 30% of this $300 billion NBFC sector just dying in the next 12, 15 months. And so there will be pain. I'm not saying the next 12, 15 months will be easy. Margins will be squeezed. But 12 months later, you'll see a very different sector, a very robust sector. And the people who have built their business with tenacity, not looking for near-term gains, will win.
Interesting. I think, so Gautam, it's only big boys play now, it seems. I think the consolidation will possibly result in NBFCs, the larger NBFCs, or with banks. Consolidation, how are you seeing the market? And from a merger perspective or from a tax perspective, what are your thoughts on the consolidation that's going to happen on the NBFCs and the banking side of it?
Yeah. So before I come to this consolidation part, I think I fully agree with Manisha about the kind of action that we've been seeing, big boys. We've been overly active, especially in the ERC space, helping quite a few players, register. And I think I see a lot of asset managers here as well. Just based on our experience, especially around debt and distress in the last 2-3 years, the first most critical point is to be clear on your commercial model of business. Are you looking at leverage? If so, are you looking at domestic leverage, or are you fine to take the rupee forex hedge? What are the kind of investors you're looking for? Are you looking at prop capital? And the reason to answer this question is exactly you've got to choose what should be your structure that you use to make this business. And it's not just about tax and earning a few more IRR points on it. It's about whether you can do the transaction or the business in the first place or not. It's as fundamental as that. And I think 3 reasons why you need to do that. One, you need to be sure that you're not being competitively disadvantaged vis-a-vis what somebody else can do. Second, it's not just about today. We just saw the development over the last 24 hours on the 2050 rule. We'll speak about that in a bit. It's about having flexibility in your structure to take care of the regulatory environment changes. So all of this makes it very critical to have clarity in your mind on all of these commercial issues, which then get into deciding whether you want to do the FPI route, you want to go in an NBFC, you want to do an acquisition, you want to do, let's say, an AIF, or what we came very close to in the SEBI committee on the alternatives of whether you want to set up, what's called a PDC, but it's yet to see the light of day. Hopefully, we'll see some action on that front. That was just to, bridge the gap between, as I think Guneet mentioned, supply and demand of capital in the debt space. So it's the fundamental learning experience we've had in the last 2-3 years. And flowing from that, when you especially come down into the more regulatory, the accounting, the tax issues, obviously IFRS, the transition that India has had from Indian GAAP to Ind AS, that's thrown up a couple of surprises. Both these things are new. The play in the distress space and the Ind AS is new. So for example, goodwill impairment used to be very clear in Indian GAAP and how you would get treatment under MAT. That's all up in the air now. It's a lot more subjective. A very interesting experience we faced when we set up an AIF for a large group. If the control is not structured properly, you could have all the bad loans that are acquired by the AIF getting up to the group's main balance sheet in consolidation. And they just kill the structure. So these are the kind of issues that, new, evolving, developing. Tax, of course, in this, the big thing is, can I get benefit of the unabsorbed losses? Because that's bound to be there in this space. So great, challenging work. I know we've been together on a lot of this stuff together, but that's the lay of the land here.
Yeah. I think we'll be discussing on this goodwill impairment because that's one of the important ones. I think, Guneet, I'll just come back to you on this one. That's the meat of it. From a business model perspective, and of course, I think there are many ways of doing credit. You can set up an AIF, ARCs, and all of it. But I think NBFC is what we're discussing, and that's where a lot of people are asking that what is it that is, that people should be focusing on? What are the business models that you're looking at? Somewhere people think that the future is really to go retail. The future is to go fintech. Nobody is having times to wait for 2-3 days for getting a loan approved. These days it's fast timing. 5 minute loan approved hota hai, 90 seconds. So fintech and retail seems to be the segment, and then you grow your book by listing. What are the business models that you're looking at, and what is the overall exit strategy of it all?
See, as far as business models are concerned, and there could be many business models, and there could be different viewpoints, which is better or worse. So I'm just sharing with you what is APAC's viewpoint. Okay. So as I said very clearly, we like to do businesses, we like to have partners where the standards are much higher, difficulty factor is greater, and the same applies to in terms of the kinds of businesses which we want to do in the NBFC. So I'll give you cases in point. So we thought we were going to do structured finance businesses at the upper end of the curve. And then very quickly we realized that what was happening with structured finance was, for the same effort, people wanted to do larger and larger deal sizes. Someone wanted to do 25 crores, and somebody else will do 50, 100, 250, 500, 1,000 crores, and all the names in this whole structured finance space are familiar. And we said, wait, that makes no sense, because that's market. There's a huge demand-supply gap for sure, but it's a very competitive space fed off by the NBFCs. And obviously, it's a much higher risk space. Who's feeding spaces where the small and medium entrepreneurs want to borrow between 5 to 25 crores? Who's feeding that space? But that's a difficult space, because if you want to apply the structured finance technology into that space, you got to spend the same time, right? But much lower operating leverage. But the fact is, you build businesses then with real customer moats, with real pricing power, with longevity. The other opportunity, someone mentioned real estate. How many NBFCs have builder finance, developer finance, right? And guess what? For APAC, we have zero, because it's the easiest business to do. You don't need to hire rock stars to go and build a real estate finance business. So even in a housing finance company which does affordable housing, it has zero builder finance, zero real estate finance, zero developer finance and structured finance, none of the above. So any business which we think is does not have a high difficulty factor, we think that business will get traded out. Let's spend a moment on micro enterprises. We actually are going to be building a business where we're going to be financing micro enterprises between 5 lakhs to 20 lakhs. Why? Because it's difficult to do. It is a government priority. It is a regulatory priority. Those priorities are not going to change irrespective of the government. But it's a tougher business to do. But if you do it well, if you digitize it well, it's a business where long-term economics for shareholders and for other leverage providers can be there. What about leverage? Actually, our business model for the 5 years assumes a peak leverage of 3 times. That's it. Don't build businesses which are sitting on 6, 7, 8 times leverages. Now, let me talk about since you were speaking about business model, let's talk about Fintech. Absolutely. I think digital businesses which solve real customer problems or real access problems are really great businesses. But be careful only of one thing. Just because digital businesses get valued at 5, 10, 15 times book or whatever it may be, that may be today. But if you can't see visibility of P&L over the next 12, 24 months, be careful. Because if those valuations change, you'll be left holding a baby which produces no money and no one is valuing it. Then you might as well be in businesses which make money even if no one is valuing it. So be very careful even on the whole digital businesses to get built out. And we're actually building out our digital businesses, don't get me wrong. I'm a personal private investor in 2 digital businesses, one which has actually gone to bankruptcy and the other one is sitting at 10 times its pre-money book, right? So, and that I did over the last several years just to experience, right, what was the change which was happening. Absolutely, that's the only way to go. Absolutely, that's a good way to go forward, building the whole fintech businesses. But be clear, when are they going to make money? And if they're not making money over the next 12 to 24 months, push your teams harder, in fact, investors should be pushing managements much harder than on those businesses.
I think we'll just have space for, 2 questions. So later on, just towards the end, just staring out if anyone has anything, you can write it and someone will reach out to you. Gautam, one question I think for you is a lot of NBFCs as a part of their, are looking at good loan securitization, which is kind of coming in a big way. What is your, from a tax accounting perspective, what are your thoughts on that? Do you see that happening a lot now?
Yeah, so we just came off one transaction recently, and maybe I can share some learnings out of that. And before that, yeah. So one of the things we realized is RBI does have detailed norms around securitization for NBFCs, but there's only a draft set of guidelines for that for HFCs. So that's hopefully should be moving along. I think one learning was be prepared in advance, because this is a highly regulated industry, and make sure you got your structure in place. Because whichever mode you try to opt for, there is a time lag from the time you can start using it. So, whether it's a SEBI registration or an RBI registration or whatever, do plan for that timeline, number one. Number two, obviously, in this whole space, like I said, if it's a consolidation piece, there's always, can I extract value from the unabsorbed losses? In the AIF structure, one big business risk that we do see, and this is around the whole distress space, the AIF structure today is built upon a tax pass-through. And in the distress space, there's a risk that this income of the AIF could be regarded as business income. If that happens, the tax pass-through falls away. So that's a call we have to take today when we're setting up the structure, how confident we are of that, what's the risk, and how do we mitigate that? And that could mean a lot of difference in the tax outflow, and therefore impact IRRs. So that's one of the big things we saw, other than I said, planning in advance.
Rajiv, I think just before we end, your final thoughts from where you started. The state machinery plays a very important role in the whole system, right? Whether it's ILFS or the NBFC crisis and all. Now, I hope, and I think we all hope, this is not systemic. But what can be done from your perspective, right? From a state machinery perspective, that this does not become systemic. What are the checks and balances? You talked about adjudication. Can you talk a little bit more, like a few pointers that we can think about from a government perspective?
Yeah, so couple of points I wanted to make. To Gunit's point about the opportunity in the landscape, the irony in our system is that for financial services, actually, the opportunity is just mind-boggling. But we have to understand the nature of the opportunity. 98% of all jobs in this country are in the informal sector. So the bulk of business activity is actually happening in the informal sector. The credit needs, when we talk about all the 1.3 billion people, underserved credit, et cetera, we talk about retail credit. Actually, the huge underserved market is the credit need for the informal economy. So this point about the micro enterprises, that's really where the future is. Now, so from a government point of view, there are 2-3 things that have happened that have actually been extremely positive for unlocking the door to this opportunity. There have been regulatory changes. There have been technology facilitation changes. So the availability of data in order to facilitate underwriting, I think, is the biggest revolution in financial services that is in the making. And that has been because of positive government action. Maybe it wasn't intended like this, but this is how it's worked out. So had it not been for Aadhaar, had it not been for GST, with all its problems, et cetera, the availability of data and whatever's happened in telecom. So you take smartphone penetration, the sophistication of our telecom networks, the changes in regulations, the payment system, NPCI, huge success story, is now provided the keys to this door of great opportunity. The real challenge, in my view, is twofold. One is on the legal side. NCLT is absolutely in the right direction, but the resources available, the training available, needs a lot to be desired. It's early days, but a lot more investment needs to happen in developing the capacity of the resolution infrastructure to make adjudication more effective. That will take time. So in the interim, what is required? In the interim, especially for large ticket resolution, somebody has to have the political courage to make some difficult decisions about allocation of pain. Some state governments have actually done it better than others. Gujarat has done actually a pretty good job. They've made some brave decisions on how to salvage some assets. That political courage is required. Whether that's forthcoming or not, I'm pessimistic about that. The second thing that is required, and that I think is very doable, is better coordination between different regulators. Now, one of the big systemic problems that we have in the financial system today is the gap between SEBI and RBI. So all the credit that has been fed into the mutual fund industry, it's ballooned. This is part of the ILFS problem, right? Where were they distributing all this credit? Where's this money coming from? What has been the regulatory oversight from allowing this side of the financial system to grow completely at a different pace from the way RBI has been looking at NBFCs? So if government, RBI, SEBI, all the regulators come together and think strategically about where the gaps are, that need to be filled to prevent or mitigate regulatory arbitrage and create these unforeseen pockets of potential stress, and B, apply their minds together to facilitate this great opportunity. So the tax people don't talk to anybody else, right? The biggest obstacle to unlocking this is the securitization. The biggest obstacle to the convivial coexistence between NBFCs and banks is securitization. And I'll just end with an example on China, because there's a lot to be learned from China, right? We keep talking about financial inclusion in this country. I know, for all the work I've done in microfinance and all that, you've been well aware of all that. Tencent, Alibaba, these guys, what they have done in the last year and a half of financial inclusion in China is mind-boggling. It's all data-based underwriting, okay? But what is even more impressive is the way the government has facilitated the interface or the competition between Alibaba, Tencent, and the banks. I mean, their public sector banks are also not very sophisticated. They're under stress. They're under earnings pressure, et cetera, but they have facilitated the sale of assets originated by Alibaba, Tencent to the banks. These guys are making very fat margins on these loans. These are not easy to do. They only have the data. They can underwrite intelligently. They share that margin with the banks. The banks are growing their books and profitability in partnership with Alibaba and Tencent. One is helping the other, and they're delivering financial inclusion. This requires some pragmatic, strategic thinking and coordination. We can do it. It's not political. It's actually just pure administration.
Just to add to what Rajiv said, I think you all must recall when Satyam happened, and I remember at the time Satyam happened, there was this huge risk that there was huge concern there's going to be a contagion effect, right? All the IT services companies in India are going to get impacted. But an early resolution to TechM really helped save the whole sector. You saw what happened globally. When Lehman happened, the US government, for example, and we can all argue whether they were sophisticated, more sophisticated bankers and people running the process, but the whole TARP process happened. Bank of America was forced to buy Merrill Lynch, and so on and so forth. Morgan Stanley got capital from Mitsubishi. I think they just forced a resolution. And today, if you see the US banks versus where the European banks are, Europeans were far more tardy about, recapitalizing the banks, etc. And you can see the market's forgiven it. So, to your point, from the investor's point of view, I think what we need to see is an early resolution. Markets understand that these things happen. It's unfortunate. There shouldn't be a contagion effect. And more importantly, that the government and the regulators are willing to have an early resolution to the process. And I think the faster we can see a resolution to ILFS, the faster confidence will come back.
So it's not too late. It's not too late. I think, Manisha, just one very quick one for you. Huh? Very, very quick one. You're a very seasoned banker. You deal across sectors. Tell me, where do you see financial services now vis-a-vis other sectors on a scale of, let's say, 1 to 10? Where do you see it amongst other sectors?
At least you called me seasoned and not father figure, so it's good. I think financial services is a very strong opportunity. It's a fabulous sector in India. What you've seen in banking will happen in the NBFC sector. I remember my grandfather and father were both state-owned bankers, and the dinner table conversation used to be, my grandfather used to ask my father कि किस कंपनी को पैसे लेंड किए, उसके कैश फ्लोज कैसे थे. अभी तो कोई कैश फ्लो पूछता ही नहीं है, राइट? आई मीन अब तो प्राइस टू बुक है. So I think it will go back to that. It will go back to real business models, high governance, all the things that the panel has discussed. And the opportunity is huge. I mean, if there's $250 billion of, financialization of savings happening, 2 trillion economy going to 6 trillion, last mile connectivity to the rural India, which was never known, when we were growing up. I think you just can't debate the opportunity. I'm very happy that the froth is out of the system. It's out of the system painfully, I agree. But I think we will have a much better outcome 12 to 18 months from now.
One more. Offshore versus onshore, right? You can do credit in India. There are enough offshoring vehicles, there are FPI, FDIs, and all of that, versus an AIF, which is more like a credit yield vehicle, versus an NBFC, which people see more like a growth vehicle. Make it grow, list, exit, and all that. Do you see people more interested towards the NBFC side, or they're saying, let's sit outside, let's see how the market is growing, NBFC is a later stage?
No, I think there's interest. I mean, I go back to my point on Aadhaar housing. When the process started, there was huge skepticism. But look, the outcome has showed you it's traded at 3.3 times book value. So it's shown you that the NBFC segment has not gone out of fashion at all. And it's seen at the last mile connectivity, and NBFC provides, a bank can't provide. People understand that. But to your earlier point, it will be models which are both consolidated, which work in tandem with banks, which work in tandem with microfinance companies. Those are the ones that will come out winners. In each segment, there'll be winners and losers. And I think NBFCs, pretty much people remain interested.
Perfect.
Just a short point. I don't know how many of you followed RBI's announcement yesterday, right?
Yes.
About rating-driven norms.
Yes.
It's interesting. RBI did not come out with these guidelines based on size of NBFCs. It was not that the big boys will get lower adequacy needs and the small people will have higher. They did it based on quality. And who says a smaller or mid-sized entity can't be better rated than a larger size entity? So be very clear about going down the quality spectrum, whether it's in the quality of your businesses, the quality of your clients, whether it's the quality of your investors, whether it's the quality of your governance. That's the thing which is that premium. That's the difference between HDFC Bank, Kotak Bank, and the rest. It's not who has better technology. It's not who has better people. All of them have equally good people. It's not about who has better distribution. It's about who has better quality metrics on businesses and governance.
Great. I think we can just have...
Also the people in the auditorium.
Yeah, I think people in the auditorium or here, I think we just have space for 2 questions at max, very quick ones. And then, Gautam, I'll hand over for you for the closing remarks.
My question, can you hear me? Yeah. My question is to Rajiv. He said 30% of his assets were not performing when he applied for license. So why did the RBI nor the auditors find out that his 30% is bad? Or is it because the NBFC doesn't have a separate regulator? So, like if you go to a bank, you have every branch inspection, they find out what is wrong. But in case of NBFC, it's difficult. Second question is whether NBFC is a failed model. Whether NBFC model is a business model is a failed model because they depend on a tap. The tap is closed, NBFC dies. So this is 2 questions.
Sorry.
So actually RBI were fully aware. So it's not that 30% were NPLs. 30% were stressed according to our own internal definition. So we knew that these assets were headed towards what would eventually become an NPL. And this was disclosed to our auditors. It was disclosed to RBI way before. So
Same reason is for ILFS has the same problem, right? Because that nobody
so
could
I
find
don't know. So see, we don't know what was happening to the other people in the same consortia, but we were sharing information with the RBI at that time, saying that according to us, we don't believe this asset is going anywhere. So you figure out, I mean, in fact, it was we can have a smaller group discussion about it.
Yeah.
How do you classify those assets that management believe are actually stressed, but technically are still servicing, right? So we were looking way ahead. And by the way, one of the things,
the next level.
advice to NBFCs, right? It reinforces Gunit's point. Leverage is very dangerous. You know, again, going back to the IDFC experience, we survived this very, very difficult period only because we raised capital when we could, not when we needed it. When we went into the journey, we had 23% tier 1 capital adequacy. We've completely cleaned up the balance sheet, we still have 17% tier 1 capital adequacy. Had I needed capital from the market, we would have been finished. On your second question, is the NBFC model dead? No. The NBFC model, I've been very, I was part of the Thorat committee, RBI. It was just to be fair to RBI, their biggest concern has been that there are so many finance companies of different kinds and different guises, they do not have the regulatory capacity to oversee them. And a lot of entities would then abuse their status in saying, RBI has given us this license, hence, vis-a-vis the rest of the public, they're presenting themselves in a way that the RBI has been very uncomfortable with. I think the learning from elsewhere, anywhere else in the world on NBFCs that do not have a depository franchise, is that you must be able to securitize your balance sheet. NBFCs is not about size, it's about recycling capital profitably. So this is why I'm saying, if there was some strategic collaboration between tax and finance sector regulators, we could really create a very powerful partnership between NBFCs and banks.
Great. So raise when you can and recycle when you when you should. Last question, please.
Yeah, hi. Question again to Rajiv. In the incident of ILFS, there is another aspect that we may like to draw. There were a lot of good quality institutional shareholders. And if there's been a governance problem, and many of us who've been part of the system could see some of it coming in advance, what do you think really, and it's not just that they were Indian institutional shareholders, they were also overseas. I do wonder what is the quality of institutional shareholder supervision. That was a professional company run completely by institutional shareholders.
I've now, I'm not sharing any secrets with you. This is common knowledge. I've been in different boards of a variety of companies, including my own. And I can tell you, shareholders' line of sight into what is happening comes through a very, very strong filter, right? So it really depends on the integrity of management to give line of sight to their board members and to the shareholders. Otherwise, things can remain hidden forever. I made this point about independent directors, et cetera, and directors generally. Even you go to a board meeting of a bank, look at the documents, like 750 pages you have to read. Who has the time and the ability and the technical capability to go through all these notes and then ask questions. You know, वो game हुआ करता था ना कि what is it called? Battleships. B4. You say, oh, did I hit your submarine? It's like that being on the board or a shareholder. If you ask the right questions, उसने जवाब दे दिया ठीक है, right? But managements actually have to be proactive and share transparently, even if it hurts, what the hell is actually happening in the company. Unless they are willing to do that, nobody really knows. And I can tell you, sometimes even senior management doesn't know. However sophisticated your MIS is, you don't have access to information. Getting information from your own organization as it becomes larger is not a trivial problem. Those are conversations over drink. Let's not.
All right. The next session. All right. Gautam, it's over to you.
Yeah, so I'll just. Wow. I think I can summarize the feelings across the room. It's a great session because the talk was very candid and based on pure experience of the legends, if I may say, that we have here on the stage. Rajiv, your bird's eye view from the lion's den of the experience that you had in IFC, and a couple of points you so rightly made. The problem was looming, and you were surprised that no one saw it. And in hindsight, it's easy to say that, but I think that's where the vision really counts. And I really liked your point at the end where you said you think family businesses are better. I think that's a great point of view that you have. Guneet, you rightly stressed upon values, and the point being made that big is not necessarily good. And big bad can be real bad, as we've seen it. Manisha, thanks for giving the confidence against that big boys are looking in India and interested. I think a lot of folks in the room will be happy with that. Nishith bhai, I will just reiterate Rajiv's comment that we are blown out by this place. Fantastic. I think the whole Imaginarium, the vision to put it up itself is quite visionary. So thanks so much for giving this to everybody over here. Nishith bhai started by saying that he wants people to slow down over here. I've been coming to Alibag now almost on a monthly basis for the last 20 years. I can totally relate to that comment. I don't know how many of you all, when you all got off the board and just the short walk to the car, you would have probably felt a little less stressed. So this is the right place to think, the right place to let the clutter out. You have the rest of the day. There's a lot of interesting stuff happening. This was a great, if I'll say, scene setter for the rest of the day. Feel free to walk out on the lawns and explore some of the ideas that have been thrown into your head during the networking sessions. We hope you have a great day. I'll just end on a slightly lighter note. Someone did say that the two inevitables in life, taxes and death, but a wise tax person commented, well, tax has the upper hand because it's capable of being retrospective. And on that light note, let me say thank you again, Rajiv, Guneet, Manisha. Excellent session. Thank you for sharing your thoughts. And to NDA for giving this platform for this unique experience that we will all have today. Thank you so much. It's been wonderful.
Thank you, Gaurav. Gautam, sir.
All right.
Thank you.